Reed Talk is sponsored by Barton Cane. Barton Cane produces gouged, shaped, and scored oboe cane. Their cane is processed on precision equipment designed by them. Choose your type of cane, shape, and tube diameter in increments of 0.25 millimeters. Your days of saying no to happy hours are over. Use coupon code ILOVEReedTalk, all one word, for free shipping. Take back your life with Barton Cane. And by Reed Design. With the power of machine learning, Reed Design derives patterns and trends that accurately predict the characteristics of finished reeds. Founded by Logan Asterling, Reed Design makes quality reeds with characteristics you can count on. Save valuable time and get back to what you love, making music. Visit reeddesign.io to learn more. And also by Ugly Duckling Oboes helps every student succeed, offering both in-person and online lessons. An authorized dealer of Fox, Fasadi, and Buffet instruments, we offer sales and rental of new and used oboes. We sell reeds and oboe cane for all levels of oboists. Let Ugly Duckling Music be a part of your student's success story. Like us on Facebook or go to uglyducklingoboes.com. And also by Blamin' Music. The standard of excellence for 50 years, Blamin' Music instrument stands are back. Under new ownership by Broadway doubler Julie Pacheco, Blamin is creating a revamped product line for today's musicians. The new Blamin pegs include color-contrasting visibility markings and are made from material that is kinder to your instruments. Visit blaminmusic.com to purchase your new favorite place to put down your oboe or English horn. Welcome to Reed Talk. I'm Margaret Marco.
And I'm Courtney Miller.
We are so excited to be kicking off our 4th season of the Reed Talk podcast with an interview with Lindsay Flowers. Lindsay is the assistant professor of oboe at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Mead-Witter School of Music. She also is the English hornist of the Madison Symphony, and she plays second oboe and English horn with the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. We are so thrilled to have you with us here today.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
We're taking a little detour from the format of a lot of our podcast episodes, and we're talking to Lindsay primarily about gouging machine maintenance. Yeah, we actually had a request from a listener who said, hey, why don't you consider talking about how to sharpen the blade? How do you maintain a gouging machine?
Mm-hmm.
What are things I need to know as the owner of a gouging machine so that I can be a happy gouger? Mm-hmm. So we're honoring that request. But maybe before we get going into the heart of the matter, let's just talk about what gouging is. So, Lindsay, tell us, define gouging machines, give us a little background in that for those of us, because gouging is, that's an advanced stage of reed making. Mm-hmm. You don't start off, reed making 101, learning about how to gouge. You wait until you've got all the basics down.
Yeah, I actually think that's why a lot of people have hesitancy to learn to maintain their own gouging machine, is that they are purchasing it when they're already an expert reed maker. Maybe they're, well on their way to being a professional oboist at that moment. And it seems that to learn another skill from the ground up feels daunting. But I like to say it's just a little bit of skill and a bit of knowledge. And so if you can learn the knowledge, then you can learn the skill to take care of and maintain your gouging machine. So I'm passionate about everybody being able to maintain their own gouges because that's, going to make them a better reed maker, a better oboist, and it just takes a little bit of commitment and everyone can do it. Your first question, though, was what is gouging? And gouging is, you're taking the tube cane, you're splitting it, you're finding the most straight piece, you're finding that sweet spot of 10.25 to 10.5 diameter on the cane. And then once you guillotine and you plane that, so you're flattening it where both sides of the cane are totally straight. So then when you put it over your shaper tip, you can line that up and trust that it's going to be straight. So you're planing that cane to be about 7 millimeters wide. Also, if it's wider, your gouger blade's going to have a harder time grabbing it. But gouging is the process of scooping out the center of the cane with a machine. So there are two main types of machines. There's the single radius gauge and then the double radius gouger. And then there's also push-through gougers like the Inality, and that one is more of like the single radius gouger. But the one that I've worked extensively with is the one by Mr. Frillo, and similar to the Graf or the Wolfeld machine, these are offset double radius gouges, which basically build a spine and a little bit of thicker rails into the center of your reed versus having to leave that on the outside. I have quite a bit of work with the Cooney Bear as well, which is a center cut gouge as based similar to the RDG, the Gilbert gouge. And both of those, you want to center the bed to the guide. And so when you flip the cane at the end, hardly anything comes off, if anything, just some dust. But with the offset gouge, that last swipe when you flip the cane in the gouger, that last swipe has it's about half the reed, maybe slightly less, but about half the reed towards the rod inside of the cane.
Maybe we could define some of these terms.
Sure.
The double radius gouge. What is that?
Yeah. So essentially, the part of it is the bed being offset. So instead of like the symmetrical gouge, the guide runs right down the center of the bed, whereas in the double radius, the offset gouge, it runs towards the rod or on the inside of the cane. Is where the blade, the cutting action lies. And so you end up flipping the cane as you're gouging, and then it scrapes basically a W into the inside of the cane. And so the fall off from the center, I like to say like one tip of the micrometer, like the really narrow pointed tipped micrometer, one little point off from the center. Instead of being 60 down the center, then one little point off to the side, you want to be 59. And so you want to make sure that fall off is right, going right away, falling off from the center.
And that's the double radius gouge.
That's the double radius, yeah.
And then the single radius, there's no flipping involved. You just...
Yeah, essentially you take it all the way down until it stops cutting, and that should be about 60 in the middle, 59, 60, 61, whatever your preference is. And then you flip the cane, and essentially, I mean, there's always imperfections in the cane, and so sometimes like a little bit of dust will come off, but for the most part, it's just a extra, security swipe, but it won't really take much off, maybe some dust. And if it does take more off, then you have to work a little bit. Your bed just got off alignment, and so you should center that.
Well, maybe you could talk to us about how you got so interested in gouging maintenance.
Yeah. Mr. Furlow came out to Indiana a lot while I was at Indiana University studying for my master's and doctorate. And he I guess the first time I worked with him, though, is because I dinged the guide on my gouge. And so I went out to his house in Boston. I was out visiting my brother on the East Coast. And I was like, can you help me? I was so embarrassed. But I think I learned, my brother was like, just know that you're an undergrad. It doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to know these things yet. And that gave me confidence to like approach it. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Tell me everything. And I got a lot of knowledge just from, just showing up. But I think that's important. Important concept to remember as a professional is that you really want to still not be afraid to ask questions and not be afraid of what we don't know. It doesn't matter what age we're at, like if we don't know something, but to seek that out and still learn. So I think there's nothing, like when I was working on a lot on gouges, most of them were, professional oboists. And so, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a thing that isn't widely known, and people just think it's like some mystery and they're frustrated by it. But I really think everyone can learn how to do it and should learn how to do it. And then once they do that, they're going to learn the value of that, because they know when it's a good gouge or not. I mean, like, we know what is good. It's just how do we get there? And I think that's just that's just where we're at, like as an oboe community. And so a lot of people are starting to learn how to do this. And I really like helping people learn how to do that. So,
I mean, you kind of touched on this, but it's not really written down. There's a lot of oral history maybe involved with. So I think that we should all give each other a little bit of pass on being experts on painting a machine, because it's something you do learn from your teacher or from another oboist. Like you did, you sort of stumbled into your experience with Mr. Ferrello. So
yeah. And I remember one summer I was learning how to set up an English horn gouge, and I went down to San Antonio and worked with Mark Ackerman that summer. And that was really cool, just to learn like what is different about the English horn Ferrello gouge versus the oboe gouge. But a lot of the stuff I learned from him like informed my work. And so while I worked a lot of, obviously, with Linda Stroman and Roger Rowe when I was at Indiana, and a lot of everything I know is a combination from everybody. And so as well as like on the job training, right? You're just doing it. People were sending their gouges and I just was doing it. And you learn a lot really quickly, but you don't have to be doing it all the time to learn how to do it. And I really think there's just like, a few guiding principles. And if you kind of go through the process in one way, then you're not going to go crazy about it. So I think people start getting frustrated when they're jimming screws back and forth and back and forth. I mean, it's like adjusting an oboe. When we have a key that isn't sealing, you start with it too loose and you get it just a little tighter until it's just right. And then when it's at that moment, you just like you can feel the difference. And I really think that with these gouges, like start with the blade retracted, start with it away from the rod, and then only be tightening the screws to push the blade down towards the bed and push the blade towards the rod, and then you're only moving it in one direction. It's when we start, let's do this and that. And it's also like adjustments where you think you turned the screw, you probably did. So do it with that sort of like level of minute turns, and then it'll just you'll be able to control that. So that's like basically the only skill I think of with maintaining a gouge is being able to turn a screw slowly and being able to have patience and being able to put it away and come back the next day. I always work on gouges when I have 2 days in a row that I can kind of work on them, just so then I have a fresh brain for like the absolute finishing adjustments. And so, but just, keep it fresh and keep it light when you're doing it, and know those few principles, and know that like sometimes to get your result, you might have to combine 2 or 3 things. And then that's knowledge. So I really think if you can gain the knowledge, you'll be plenty good. And once you can, so I guess the skill is turning the screw slowly, but also being able to sight the blade. And so I remember when I was first trying to sight the blade, I was looking from like a downward view on the guide to see the blade. But what you want to do is actually look along the guide. So it's like a dagger shooting out of your eye would go straight along the spine of the guide into the blade. Yeah.
So Lindsay, can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of the gouge and what it can affect in our reed making? Absolutely.
Well, we all know when we have an opening of a reed that kind of looks like a diamond. I really like that. So when you're closing the tip of the reed together, some people do it on a plaque. And so you see one half of the reed and then you see the other half of the reed. But even just in your fingers, you want to see that center stay open and the sides of the reed to close first and close, and that center of the reed to hold open, because that's going to help you with response. That's going to help you with stability, having enough upness in the upper register, as well as it's going to help you with projection. And so you're going to want to have that center of the reed. We all know the spine of the reed. We talk about that all the time. But if you have that built in the center, with a double radius gouge, you can achieve having that spine on the inside. And so when I'm scraping on a double radius reed, offset gouge reed, my spine, when it hits the plateau, actually joins the thickness of the plateau. It's not going to stand out even more from the plateau, because then if you look at the side profile, you'll see your spine grow in the center. And so I just want to see that spine. I don't want to hit it in the back, but I want it to join the plateau smoothly. And then I think that has like the best flow of the vibrations to reed and the best stability. It allows all of that. So having a good gouge is one that makes that opening that diamond shape, but also when the reed dries out, it makes the shape of the opening smooth and not have that sort of bacon opening. So, when your gouger blade is going dull, when you start seeing bacon openings or little cracks in the tip, and then it's time, that maybe you are pressing with your pressing the guide into the cane and it was rubbing on the cane. And so that creates weakness in it. And so when you get to that last thin layer of cane, because essentially your tip is made from the shape of the gouge, because you're using only, it's like such a thin piece of cane at the tip of a reed, that essentially is the gouge, scraping it at as much or even more than what we scrape on the outside. And so having that blade be sharp and in good condition is so important for having, response and the cushion that you're looking for with the tip.
Can I ask a question about a term you used?
Yeah.
Did you say bacon openings? Like bacon, like we eat bacon?
I think that's right.
I like it.
Okay, I might need just a little bit more explanation on the bacon opening.
Okay, so it's not, maybe your tip is sizzling, but that's not the point. You got that little hiss. No, I'm kidding. The bacon opening.
I know what you're talking about.
It's a thin spot in your tip. But I guess that could be from the gouge, probably more from scraping. Anyway, so bacon opening, I always think it's when it dries out and it's a little bit crinkly. So the tip of your reed, when you look down on it, not like or you're looking at the opening of your reed and you see it's not a smooth like football or diamond sort of shape, but that there's like a little wave or there's imbalance in it. So you notice that it's not closing symmetrically. Even when it's dry, I always look at my reeds to make sure that the taper off at the sides that is holding together and that it's symmetrical. I'm
so glad you said that because when reeds are dry in our case, they should have a certain look too. We shouldn't just say, I'm going to soak it and it'll be fine when I soak it up. So sometimes that opening, I tell my students it looks like the opening of a clam, like a cartoon clam. And
that's the same.
And so, so if you're looking at the opening of your reeds and it looks like a piece of bacon or a clam, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and that's most likely from the gouge. That's most likely just from the blade being dull.
Okay. Yeah. Because there's a little bit of tearing, I imagine. Because the blade, the tip of the reed we're talking 1/10 of a millimeter, if that. Maybe a point, half of a 1/10 of a millimeter.
Exactly, yeah. So fragile.
So thin. Yeah.
Right, so when your blade is dull, we all press harder on the guide to get the blade to interact with the cane. Or maybe you're exposing more of your blade to let the blade cut more, but then that's the fall off from the center of your gouge is going to be affected. So I would not suggest that. I also wouldn't suggest just like lowering your parallels, because what you're doing then by doing that is just having the guide rub on the inside of the cane, and that sort of friction, like you don't want to mull over. You're finishing finishing the gouging motion, and you don't want to keep rubbing it along and being like, nothing's coming off, and keep rubbing it many times on the cane, because that's essentially the guide rubbing on your cane, and that's also going to affect that. But you also know, and obviously people know when their blade is dull, the inside of the cane looks not shiny. It doesn't, when you have a sharp knife and you're scraping on the outside and your reed turns shiny, and that's like exactly what we always want from knife sharpness. Same thing goes on the gouge. When it's cutting the inside of the cane, you want the result to be shiny. So if it's not shiny, you maybe have soft cane, but and do you guys use the hardness tester from reeds and stuff? I think it's a really good tool. So you have to do it on dry cane, otherwise it's going to register as soft. But when the cane is dry after you gouge, if you get anywhere, I like numbers between like 8 to 11. Once it starts getting to be 12, the cane is softer. And then I'm not able to like really finish a reed. Sure, it vibrates fast if you have soft cane, but the harder the cane is, the more you can like really finish that tip. And then you can get like the reed will last longer, but also it can create that curvature at the S curve and really finishing the corners. You won't rip a corner off because the cane is soft. It's going to stay together more. So the shreds that are coming off are, I want it to be like 6 to 7 on the Kuniberra. And I think that's, like obviously hundredths of a millimeter. Yeah. So you can tell that like when it is soft and those shreds coming off are pithy and there's like little bubbles and air pockets, you just know that that's a soft piece of cane. Or, I want to try this like density tester that the bassoonists use by Rieger. I think that would be really interesting to try on oboe cane as well. And I think it's a combination between density as well as hardness. So I have an oboist in my studio right now who studied some in Germany, and he says that the density matters even more than the hardness. I haven't done that research myself yet, but that's one of my to-do projects coming up. So I think it would be really cool to experiment with that. But right now, just the hardness like eliminates so many pieces of cane that then like won't vibrate or have the core to the reed that I want it to. So hardness tester.
And Lindsay, do you use the hardness tester after you've pre-gouged it or after you've gouged it?
Yeah, it's after I gouged it. So I guess if I notice it being pithy in the gouge and I know my blade isn't dull, then I'll probably stop gouging it and throw that piece away. But I do think that if I gouge it and it feels okay and then I let it dry out and then it still is registering like a 13 or 14, then, and sometimes up to like a 16. I try and order hard cane, but sometimes you just get those pieces and then I toss those ones.
Do you do that with every piece of cane?
Yeah.
You check it on the hardness tester? Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But even more importantly, like with gouging, it's important to measure your canes. So you want to measure down the center.
Yes.
Yeah, you want to measure each end as well as in the center. So this is like the center. If you're looking down the piece of cane, this whole center swipe, right? You want it wherever your happy spot is. Like 60 is probably what I'll just say for now. But anywhere between 59 and 61 is, people have preference, but it should always be consistent once you have your gouge in the place that you want. So let me just roll with 60 as our measurement for the center. I want end to end of that center like grain of cane. Make sure that you're following your grain. If you have twisted cane, you're not able to follow that grain and the gouge won't cut through the twisted cane evenly. And so that's why we throw away twisted cane. But you measure down that one thread of cane all the way straight down and making sure it's the same end to end. Otherwise your opening can splay if it's thin on the ends. And that happens when we have smiley cane. So I think you probably have talked a lot about like cane selection. So with smiley cane, you're measuring the back of your cane on a flat surface and you want it to be flat, but a little bit smiley. And so when you fold that cane over, it will close, but if it's too smiley, it will get thin on the ends and then that will cause it to splay too. So I take my smiley cane and kind of flatten it out in my hands right before it's going to remember it's smiley when it dries out, but I kind of flatten the cane out before I put it in my bed because the clips in the Frillo machine aren't strong on purpose. They're not like going to press the cane into the bed. They want the cane to sit in the bed naturally. So yeah. So I kind of flatten it out before I put it in the bed. And then it usually makes that a little bit more even. But if you have frowny cane, obviously you shouldn't ever put frowny cane in the bed. But the reason is then you would notice it would scrape more out of the center part of your cane. Just like if you have too small a diameter cane, like smaller than 10.25 or even 10.25, you might notice there's thin sides of the gouge. Or if something is wider, like 10.75, you might notice that the center to the sides are the center is a little thin compared to the sides. So the proportions are super important. So cane selection, is number one. So I measure down the center, and then I also, when you're learning this, I would say shape your cane first before you measure where the ears are. But I just do it on a piece of gouged cane because I know how to eyeball it pretty well, and I want to do it right after I gouge. So just inside from the sides is where the ears would be on a shaped piece of cane. Does that make sense? So like if you're using the shaper where you fold it over, there's like a little bit of ear left. Sometimes people use a shaping machine and then the ears are off. It's a little bit different. You'll just want to measure like maybe 5 millimeters from the fold of the cane down on the very edge of that. That's what people would consider to be the sides of the cane. And so I like mine to be anywhere a little bit more than 47, but maybe like 48, sometimes even 48 and a half. So 60 in the center, 47 and a half to 48 on the sides. And then and you want to measure all 4 ears to make sure that those are even. But, and so side to side at this point is what I'm checking. So I want to make sure one half of the shape or the gouge piece cane is matching the other side of the gouge piece cane. And then I'm looking at the thread, where the thread would tie on. So like where the cane would tie onto the tube, where the thread stops wrapping is where I'm going to measure the thread measurements. And I really, on this, not even just side to side, but catty corner, I really want those to match. And if it's not catty corner matching, you know that the bed is out of alignment. So like maybe you've traveled with your gouge and it's, this is another reason not to ship your gouge to someone, because even when it comes in the mail, it could get jostled a little bit. So you just want to make sure that those are matching. So then the bed, is in proper alignment.
You mentioned smiley versus frowny.
Yeah.
And then straight. So let's talk about all the attributes of those, because straight is good, smiley's good, frowny's bad.
Yeah.
And we're talking about when the cane is it's already gouged, right? It's already gouged.
Oh, or this is even when it's on the tube. I kind of like hold the piece of the bamboo tube, a rhododendron. I hold it on the straight edge to make sure that it is relatively straight, but it's a natural object cane, and so none of them are actually going to be perfectly straight.
Yeah.
So you want it to be a little bit smiley, which means you see when you have it backlit, you want to see that there's relief on the sides and that it touches in the center, and that the relief on that cane is symmetrical. And I kind of rock the cane back and forth on it, and it shouldn't be that much smiley because then it'll get rejected out of the bed. But so straight to smiley. But you want to make sure that the rate that is touching the center of the smile when it rocks it side to side is about the same, because then that's going to make sure your two blades are symmetrical. So if one side has a big smiley and the other one's pretty flat, I probably wouldn't use that cane.
And so this is tube cane. Then when you when you guillotine the cane, you try to find the center of the smile. So you might have to chop off a little bit of one end, a little bit of the other end, so you can keep the smile in the center.
Definitely.
Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then before I'm guillotining, I always weaken that side of the cane that's going to be on the outside of the guillotine, and that helps with making sure my cane doesn't crack.
You weaken it how?
I take like a dull knife and I hold the very carefully, sometimes with like a towel around it if you're worried about getting a cane paper cut, which hurts so bad.
It's the worst. Yeah. It's the worst.
So I take like not dull, but like a knife that I've made, like a chopping knife, basically like a kitchen knife instead of a bird knife. So I take one of my old knives and I sharpen it to make it sharp as a cutting knife instead of a bird knife, but actually Mr. Furlow sells a green, I think it's a green handled knife, and it's really thin, and I actually use that for splitting my cane as well, because I'm using a razor blade. It like was too small in my hand and dangerous. So using that one with the green handle, I use that to split my cane and weaken the ends, and that is really good because it's a very thin blade, and so it slices through the cane quite easily, and that one's sharp to a point. It's a clipping knife. I think he has it listed as like a tip clipping knife, but I use it for my cane splitting and narrow paring down the ends of the cane. Yeah. So also after I've planed the cane, I actually pare down about the last 4 to 5 millimeters of the end of my cane. I kind of pare off those ends as well, because my gouger blade, when it hits the cane, I don't want it to like be suddenly the widest part of the cane. I want it to enter the cane gracefully, like really nicely. So it's not just like the guide, but if you weaken that part, I mean, that's going to be cut off anyways. It's going to be under the thread of the shaped piece of cane.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
having that little bit gone, as long as you have enough there to like grab the cane stops at the end of the bed, it's a good idea for preserving your blade a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Yeah. Some people actually narrow their cane by hand, and they would use this tool to do that. I actually suggest not to do that, because then you're having you're using that planing board, like the one from Harvard Double Reeds, where it really makes it perfectly symmetrical side to side. And once you start paring down the sides when you're shaping, it's not going to sit centered on your shaper tip, exactly centered, because you really want that spine to be right down that center of the shaped cane. And so I would probably suggest people not to pare the sides of their cane. And if your cane isn't planing narrow enough, lower the blade of the planer versus trimming down the sides. Yeah.
Can you dive into a little bit? You mentioned it, but the importance of centering the cane on the shaper tip.
Yeah, it is important, because then the way that the measurements fall off from the center, the spine that you're creating with the gouge, you want it to be right down the center, because then that's going to be your spine on the inside of your reed. That's going to hold the opening open right in the center. If it's off center and you fold it over, then part of your reed will be the opening will be kaiwampy, like it'll be flat on one side and then open on one side a little bit. So it won't seal quite as well.
Kaiwampy. I love that. Bacon opening. Kaiwampy.
Yeah, it's all the opening.
Okay. I love the terminology.
Lindsay, I loved your approach to putting the blade in and centering it.
Yeah.
Can you go back over that and apply it to other gouges as well?
Sure. Of course. Yeah. So with like a Gilbert or a Cooney Bear, I'm sighting the blade in the same way, but I'm really making sure that the taper of the blade is even side to side. Like it really goes off the way the thumbnail shows over the guide. I make sure that it really disappears at the exact same rate, and that's how you're going to get it to be totally symmetrical. And so if that blade is, if you're noticing it's cutting too much away from the rod and you flip the cane and that last swipe comes away from the rod again, then you notice you want to push the blade a little bit towards the rod. And I always say towards the rod versus away, because no matter if you have the gouge facing downward or if you're sighting down the blade towards the rod, is always the same direction or away from the rod. So that's like the way I kind of conceptualize it. And so and with the Furlow, then you're going to want to keep pushing it until the offset swipe then is exactly half the reed. So if it's coming off too much in the center, or then you need to push the blade closer to the rod. Or if maybe there's like not enough offset happening, you don't want to expose more blade. Exposing more blade will affect like the cutting action more. So first, I always, when I'm working on a gouge, is no matter what machine it is, I want to make sure that I'm getting the cutting action just right. So if it's on the symmetrical gouge, because of the angle of the blade, it's more of like thinner swipe, but it is very clean. And then on the Frillo, it's a little bit thicker. So on the symmetrical gouges like Cooney Bear, I will have it measure 5, and then on the Frillo, it can measure up to 6 or 7, and be the right amount of cutting action. And so you want it to be able to cut swiftly and cut cleanly, but then like when you're doing the finishing strokes, you're going to want it to actually need a little bit of pressure, not a lot, so it makes, that bacon opening, but just a little bit. You don't want it to be too swift, because if it's too swift, that means there's too much exposure of your blade. Most likely, it could be something with the guide too, like the fall off at the sides. But if it's the blade being overexposed, then it'll keep grabbing at the cane. After it finishes, it'll go like through the inside of the cane a little bit. You'll see it like making it sort of wavy, and you'll see a texture on the inside instead of being smooth. And so that's how you know your blade is too exposed. And so you want to keep it underexposed, and then just right to the right exposure. But you've gone too far when that happens, where it just grabs after it finishes the last swipe, and then it keeps grabbing at the cane. Then you know that there's just a little bit too much exposure. Yeah. And
I love the logicalness. Yeah, the logic you put behind it. You make it,
I'm wondering how many pieces of cane you go through as you're trying to get the right height of the blade.
Well,
you probably can eyeball it and get it perfect the first time. But
oh no, that's not true at all. It does go through quite a bit of cane.
And would you do that with your best cane, just because you're going to be wanting to see how it
that's a
works
good question.
Yeah,
no, I definitely start with test cane, which is still like a good quality cane. You don't want to use soft cane, because then you actually can't judge the cutting action. Then I do try maybe like a piece of test cane might have it might be a frowny piece, but the diameter is actually pretty good, because then you're gonna notice a little bit more, but maybe only slightly frowny. Or like, I guess I use test cane that is like if it is growing diameter, or if it maybe is more smiley on one end of the cane. So I'm just testing like for the cutting action at first, and that's like pushing the blade down. And once I get the cutting action just how I want it, then I want to make sure that it's totally centered. And like, you can do it by eye, by looking at the blade, but sometimes it's just like the minute, like you turn that screw a little bit, and by eye, the blade doesn't actually move much, but it actually does like cut a little bit differently at the cane. And so when you have an offset gouge, you're flipping the cane every maybe like 10 strokes, 5 strokes, 3, and then the offset is 2. So it's like half the reed and then one little dust after it. But so any of like the Wolfeld or the Graf or the Ferrillo, any of those offset.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. That's like the last swipe. So when you notice that not being enough, then you start pushing the blade a little bit towards the rod. So I actually start with the blade position, like not enough exposure and a little away from the rod. And then I just move it. You don't want it to be too close to the rod. You want it to be away from the rod or centered. And then that's how like the offset gouge works the best. And then for the symmetrical gouge, you really just want it totally centered. But I do start with it just a little bit away from the rod until it's exactly right. So.
And if you're taking off swaths of cane that are too thick, that means your blade's too far down?
Yeah, it's a little bit too much exposure. And then
too much exposure.
Yeah, so the side-to-side screw place tightness is quite tight, and so it's really hard to retract a blade, and so I always have to loosen the side adjustment screws before pulling the blade back a little. And so I kind of suggest to if you have to do that, then you just start over. Basically, you just retract your blade, and that's where people get frustrated. Maybe take a step away from the gouge if that happens, and come back another day when you're feeling it.
I just love, Lindsay, how you broke down how you have this systematic approach to starting underexposed and starting away from the rod. And then also earlier you mentioned, you like to do gouges over 2 days so you can kind of step away and maintain that sanity.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's when I have a fresh set of eyes, or also your cane kind of over soaks. I actually only soak cane for like 20-25 minutes, and like a plain piece of cane. And so if you soak it too much more than that, I always feel like it turns to like a rubbery consistency, and it kind of rejects the gouger blade. And sometimes as you're gouging, you're like, oh, it's too dry, and then you want to dunk it back in the water or something and dry it back off before you put it in your machine. But I really think that having cane that's not over soaked will help your gouge to function, to cut the way that is set up different.
Lindsay, so when you were talking about the bacon openings, and that was a sign that maybe your blade was kind of dull and you were having to push. Am I remembering that correctly?
Right.
What other signs can we look at in our reads where we think maybe it's time to either replace the blade or sharpen the blade? What are some signs we should look out for in our reed making?
Well, I really think you should log your cane, first of all, so know how many pieces you've gouged. And if you're the one setting up your machine, then you know how many pieces it took to set up, because sometimes it'll be, like you said, quicker than others. Sometimes I've set up a gouge with like 3 pieces. It just was my lucky day. And then sometimes it's 20. Woo. So it's like, you don't know. Right. And sometimes when I don't even know if I want to say it, but sometimes I'll even like pre-gouge the cane on like a push-through gouger, like an Inaletti, just to like 110 or something, just to get the initial strokes off to preserve my blade. But so I always know how many pieces I've gouged, and so you can kind of keep a number on that. I really think that the reed's not vibrating right. If you're like, oh, my reeds are just not vibrant, like it's just not having that like creamy, it's brittle, it doesn't have like an easy response, it could be that. So it's like using a dull knife. Once you know how a reed feels when you have a dull knife, you can't get like the vibrancy from it easily enough, and so that's how you know. But I only gouge maybe like 8 to 10 pieces at a time, and so I can kind of gouge in that gauge in the batch, like knowing, oh, it's about time or something. But mostly I can see on the inside of the cane if it's got that shiny smooth edge, or if it's starting to get like just a little bit pithy or like crumbly on the inside. It's a very fine, or a white haziness on the inside of the cane, then I can tell that the gouge is a little dull.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us and being a guest on Reed Talk today.
Well, thanks. Can I say one last thing about hand health?
Yeah,
please.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my gosh, please, yes.
Yeah, I've really injured my hand by gouging as much as I was. I was replacing, 3 blades a week in machines for a while there, when I wasn't playing and teaching full time. So I don't do that anymore, but it's really easy to push. You want to be pushing on the carriage in such a way that it's equal around the blade. And this is for any of the any gouger here, but make sure that you keep your fingers rounded. Don't hyperextend your fingers, just like when you're playing your oboe. You want to keep your fingers totally rounded. And so when you're doing that, make sure you can keep them rounded instead of collapsing at any knuckle. Where your knuckles turn white and pink. Like don't press quite that hard. Or somehow turn the gouge, instead of cutting horizontal, cut away from you, and you can put your the base knuckle of your pointer finger on the top, and then your thumb around the blade, and then I use my left thumb and push in front of the blade, and then I can swipe across that way, and that helps me not hyperextend or like damage any of my fingers. So that's like my biggest suggestion. For your gouging, just make sure you're protecting your hand, and opening your hand and stretching backwards with your arms and lengthening your hands and your arms.
Yes, you could go at it for a while and not realize how much tension has developed. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Lindsay Flowers, thanks so much for being a guest on Reed Talk today. And thanks to all of our listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We'd love to hear from you. Write to us and send us your reed-making questions at reedtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Sending good vibes from our Reed desk to yours, I'm Margaret Marco.
And I'm Courtney Miller.
Join us next time on Reed Talk.